Heavenly Stories.
Movie camera. Have you ever carried a wound so deep, it felt impossible to heal? A broken relationship that haunted your days and shadowed your nights. This is the story of two brothers, Jacob and Esau, whose bond was shattered by betrayal and fear, but also, whose lives would one day reveal the breathtaking power of God's restoration. Jacob and Esau were not just ordinary brothers. They were twins, born on the same day, from the same womb, yet destined to walk two very different paths. From the very beginning, their story carried tension. Esau, the firstborn, emerged red and strong, a natural hunter, a man of the field. Jacob followed, grasping at Esau's heel, as if trying to pull him back. His name itself carried the meaning, the one who grasps, the supplanter. As they grew, the differences became sharper. Esau thrived in the wilderness, beloved by their father Isaac, who delighted in the game Esau hunted. Jacob, on the other hand, preferred the tents, the quiet life near home, and he was favored by their mother Rebekah. This favoritism planted seeds of division, seeds that would one day erupt into full-blown conflict. The day came when hunger overcame wisdom. Esau, weary and exhausted from the field, returned home starving. Jacob, ever the strategist, had been cooking a pot of stew. "Give me some of that red stew," Esau begged. Jacob, seizing the moment, replied, "First sell me your birthright." In a moment of weakness, Esau agreed. He swore an oath and sold what was sacred, his inheritance, his future leadership, for a simple meal. It was a decision that would haunt him for years to come. Jacob had taken advantage of his brother's hunger, and though the stew filled Esau's stomach, it left his heart hollow. But this betrayal was only the beginning. Years later, when their father Isaac grew old and nearly blind, Jacob, urged by his mother Rebekah, disguised himself as Esau. He covered his arms with goat skins to mimic Esau's hair and entered Isaac's tent. With trembling voice, he lied, "I am Esau, your firstborn." Isaac, deceived, placed his hands upon Jacob and spoke the sacred blessing meant for Esau, the blessing of prosperity, dominion, and God's covenant promise. When Esau discovered the truth, his cry echoed with anguish. "Bless me, me too, my father." But it was too late. Jacob had stolen what could never be undone. Esau's pain turned to fury, and he swore in his heart, "I will kill my brother Jacob." Fear gripped Jacob. That night, his mother sent him away, urging him to flee to her brother Laban in Haran. Jacob left everything behind, the land of his father, the comfort of home, and most painfully, the bond with his twin. From that day on, the brothers walked separate paths, Esau burning with anger, Jacob carrying the heavy burden of guilt. A family divided. A wound deep enough to last a lifetime. Yet what neither of them could see was that God was already weaving a plan. A plan not of destruction, but of reconciliation. A plan that would one day turn fear into forgiveness, and hatred into healing. Movie camera. Have you ever run away from your past, thinking distance could erase the pain? Jacob did. But no matter how far he traveled, the memory of Esau's cries still haunted him. Yet in the wilderness, God was quietly shaping him for a future he could not yet see. Jacob's flight from home was not just a journey of miles, it was a journey of the soul. Behind him lay the shattered bond with his brother, the deception of his father, and the bitter tears of betrayal. Ahead lay an uncertain future in the land of his uncle Laban. The road was long and lonely. One night, as darkness fell and fear pressed in, Jacob lay his head on a stone for a pillow. In that barren place, he closed his eyes, not knowing if his brother's anger would one day catch up to him. But it was there, in his weariness, that heaven touched earth. Jacob dreamed of a ladder stretching up to the heavens, with angels ascending and descending. At the top stood the Lord himself, declaring, "I am with you. I will never leave you until I have fulfilled my promises to you." Jacob awoke trembling. He named that place Bethel, house of God, and vowed that the Lord would be his God. It was the first step of transformation. Though still broken and fearful, Jacob now knew he was not abandoned. God's hand was on him, even in exile. When Jacob finally arrived in Haran, he found refuge with his uncle Laban. But here, too, life tested him. Jacob fell in love with Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, and agreed to work 7 years for her hand in marriage. To Jacob, those years felt like only a few days, because of his deep love. But on the wedding night, Laban deceived him, giving him Leah instead. To marry Rachel, Jacob was forced to work another 7 years. It was as if the deceiver himself had now been deceived. Jacob, who once tricked his brother, now tasted betrayal. And though he eventually grew wealthy with flocks and children, his soul carried a weight that prosperity could not lift. Over 2 decades passed. Jacob's family grew, his herds multiplied, and his life seemed secure. Yet, deep inside, he knew one truth: he could not run forever. The memory of Esau still lingered. The last words he had heard from his brother were filled with rage and a vow of revenge. One day, the Lord spoke to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers. I will be with you." It was a call to return, not just to the land, but to the brother he had wronged, and to the reconciliation only God could bring. But Jacob's heart trembled. What if Esau was still angry? What if the moment he returned, Esau's sword awaited him? Every step forward meant walking straight into the storm of his past. And yet, there was no turning back. With his family, his servants, and his livestock, Jacob began the long journey home. Each mile carried him closer to the most terrifying, and most important, encounter of his life. On the road, messengers returned with chilling news: Esau was coming, with 400 men. Fear seized Jacob's heart. Was this an army of welcome, or an army of vengeance? He divided his family and flocks into groups, hoping that if Esau attacked, some might escape. He prepared gifts of livestock, hoping to soften his brother's anger. Still, uncertainty gripped him. That night, on the banks of the Jabbok River, Jacob wrestled with more than fear, he wrestled with God himself. All night he struggled, until at dawn the mysterious figure touched his hip and crippled him. Yet Jacob clung on, refusing to let go until he received a blessing. And he did. The stranger declared, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." Jacob walked away limping, but with a new name, a new identity, and a new faith. He was no longer just the deceiver, he was now Israel, the one through whom God's promise would continue. Yet one trial still awaited him. Tomorrow, he would face Esau. Tomorrow, he would see whether hatred had endured, or whether God's hand could restore what seemed forever lost. Movie camera, have you ever dreaded a moment so much that your stomach twisted with fear? Jacob did. After years of running, he was about to face the brother he had betrayed. Esau was on his way, and with him, 400 men. Would this be the end, or the beginning of something miraculous? The morning sun rose over the hills as Jacob looked into the distance. His heart pounded like a drum. Ahead of him was Esau, the brother whose cry of betrayal still echoed in Jacob's memory. Behind him stood his wives, children, and servants, lives he was sworn to protect. Every decision he had made up until now led to this moment. Messengers had confirmed it: Esau was approaching with 400 men. Jacob could only imagine the worst. Was this an army of vengeance, coming to wipe him out? Or had time softened the anger that once burned in Esau's heart? Jacob prepared carefully. He sent wave after wave of gifts, herds of goats, sheep, camels, cattle, and donkeys, to meet Esau before he himself arrived. Each group carried the same message: they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift for my lord Esau. Jacob himself is behind us. Jacob hoped that such humility might cool the fire of Esau's wrath. Yet fear remained. He positioned his family, the maids and their children first, then Leah and her children, and finally Rachel with Joseph, behind him. Then Jacob did something extraordinary. He went ahead of them all, placing himself between danger and those he loved. This was no longer the selfish schemer who once tricked his brother. This was a man humbled, a man who would risk himself to save others. As Esau approached, Jacob bowed to the ground 7 times, moving closer with each bow. His face nearly touched the dust as he humbled himself before the brother he once wronged. Then, in a moment no one expected, history shifted. Esau ran to Jacob. But not with a sword. Not with vengeance. He ran with open arms. He embraced his brother, threw his arms around his neck, and wept. Jacob wept too. The years of hatred, the pain of betrayal, the heavy silence, they all melted away in that embrace. 2 brothers, once divided, were reunited by something greater than anger, forgiveness. The wives and children approached, bowing before Esau. He looked at them with wonder and asked, "Who are these with you?" Jacob answered, "The children God has graciously given your servant." Esau, moved by the sight, welcomed them. Esau then asked about the herds and animals he had passed. Jacob urged him, "Please accept these gifts, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need." Esau at first refused, but Jacob insisted. Finally, Esau accepted, sealing their reconciliation not just with words but with actions. This was no ordinary meeting. It was a miracle of restoration. What seemed impossible, 2 brothers divided by betrayal and hatred, was transformed by God's hand into forgiveness and peace. As they walked together, Esau offered to accompany Jacob, but Jacob declined, moving at a slower pace for the sake of his children and livestock. Though they would live in different lands, their hearts were no longer torn apart. For the first time in decades, Jacob could breathe freely. The brother who once vowed to kill him had embraced him instead. And Jacob knew in his heart, this was not his doing, it was God's. He looked at Esau and said, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably." That day, the wound was healed. That day, reconciliation triumphed over revenge. Movie camera, forgiveness can heal a wound, but what happens after the embrace? For Jacob, reconciliation with Esau was not the end of his journey, it was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where God would continue to shape his destiny and prove that his plans never fail. The dust of the road settled after Esau and Jacob went their separate ways. Though their lives would not intertwine daily, their hearts had been restored. The shadow of hatred was gone, replaced with a peace only God could give. But Jacob's journey was not over. His life was still unfolding, and God had much more to teach him. Jacob continued his journey and eventually settled in the land of Canaan, the place promised to his grandfather Abraham and his father Isaac. It was the land of covenant, a reminder that his story was woven into something much larger than himself. He built altars and called upon the name of the Lord, acknowledging that every step he took was under the care of the God who had carried him this far. Yet life was not without struggle. Jacob's household grew large, his children many, and with them came trials. His daughter Dinah was wronged by outsiders, and his sons, filled with anger, took matters into their own hands, bringing bloodshed that stained Jacob's heart with sorrow. Once again, he saw how fragile peace could be, how quickly the sins of men could stir chaos. But God was not absent. He appeared to Jacob again, calling him to Bethel, the very place where Jacob had first seen the ladder to heaven. There, Jacob built an altar and purified his household, burying idols and turning hearts back to the Lord. It was as if God was saying, "I gave you peace with Esau. Now I will give you peace with me." At Bethel, God renewed his covenant, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." Though this name had been spoken to him before, now it was confirmed with power. He was no longer the deceiver defined by his past. He was Israel, the one chosen to carry God's promise into the future. Still, pain touched Jacob's journey. On the road, his beloved wife Rachel gave birth to Benjamin but died in labor. Jacob buried her along the way, setting a pillar over her tomb, a monument of love and loss. Even in the land of promise, sorrow was part of his story. Yet through grief, Jacob clung to the God who had never abandoned him. As years passed, Jacob's family became the foundation of a nation. 12 sons grew into 12 tribes, each carrying a role in the great story God was writing. And though Jacob's life was far from perfect, God's faithfulness never wavered. The memory of Esau remained like a scar that had healed, no longer bleeding, but never forgotten. Jacob knew that without God's intervention, reconciliation would have been impossible. What man could not repair, God had restored. This truth became Jacob's testimony: forgiveness was not weakness, but the greatest display of strength. Reconciliation was not man's work, but God's miracle. And as Jacob aged, leaning on his staff, he could look back and see that the God who met him at Bethel, who wrestled with him at Jabbok, and who softened Esau's heart, had guided every step. Jacob's story was proof that broken relationships can be healed. That guilt can be lifted. That even when the past is dark, God's light can pierce through and create a future filled with hope. Movie camera, what if the choices you make today echo for generations to come? Jacob and Esau's story wasn't just about two brothers, it was about the future of nations, and about how God can turn even the deepest wounds into testimonies of His grace. As Jacob's days lengthened and his hair grew gray, the story of his life became clearer. He could look back at the rivalry with Esau, the fear that drove him away, and the miraculous reconciliation that brought them back together. But what made the story even more powerful was not just what happened between two brothers, it was the ripple effect that stretched far beyond them. Esau became the father of the Edomites, a people who would settle in the region of Seir. Jacob, now called Israel, became the father of the 12 tribes, the people who would one day become the nation of Israel. Though the brothers went their separate ways, the fact that their meeting ended in peace rather than bloodshed mattered more than anyone could have imagined. Their reconciliation became a foundation, a reminder that even if nations might one day clash, there was a moment when hatred gave way to forgiveness. Their embrace was proof that God can step into the most fractured of relationships and bring healing where revenge seemed certain. For Jacob, this moment became a source of wisdom he passed to his children. His life had been marked by deception and struggle, but it was also redeemed by God's mercy. He taught his sons that blessing comes not from striving against man, but from surrendering to God. His limp from that night at the Jabbok River reminded everyone that Jacob's strength was not his own, it was God's. For Esau, his act of forgiveness marked him with dignity. Though he had every reason to demand vengeance, he chose mercy. And in that choice, he reflected the very heart of God, who forgives even when the debt is great. Esau's story reminds us that reconciliation does not erase the past, but it transforms the future. The brothers would later come together again, this time at a graveside. When their father Isaac died, both Jacob and Esau buried him together. Side by side, they laid their father to rest, a picture of unity that once seemed impossible. Two sons, once divided by betrayal, now stood together in grief and respect. The legacy of Jacob and Esau's reconciliation whispers through the pages of Scripture. It tells us that family wounds can be healed, that bitterness can turn to blessing, and that God can rewrite even the darkest chapters of our lives. Their story is not just history, it's a mirror. Because every person has relationships that fracture. Every heart knows the weight of betrayal or the pain of being wronged. But through Jacob and Esau, we see that God is able to restore what seems beyond repair. Forgiveness is never easy. Humility costs something. But the reward is peace that outlasts anger, love that defeats hate, and hope that shines brighter than fear. Jacob and Esau's story shows us that reconciliation is more than a single moment, it is a legacy. A legacy that reminds us that when God steps in, no wound is too deep, no past too broken, and no relationship too far gone. Movie camera, what if the story of Jacob and Esau isn't just about the past, but about you? What if their reconciliation is a picture of the healing God wants to bring into your life right now? The story of Jacob and Esau does not end at their father's burial, nor does it fade with the turning of the pages. Their reconciliation is more than a family drama, it is a living testimony of God's heart for restoration. Think about it, two brothers, born from the same womb, torn apart by deception and rage. For years, their lives moved in opposite directions. One became wealthy but haunted by guilt. The other grew strong but wounded by betrayal. By all human reasoning, their relationship was finished. Broken. Beyond repair. And yet, when the time came, forgiveness triumphed. Esau's arms opened wide. Jacob's tears fell freely. The bitterness of the past gave way to the beauty of reconciliation. Who could have written such an ending but God Himself? This story shows us something profound: reconciliation is not man's achievement, it is God's miracle. Jacob bowed low in humility. Esau chose mercy over revenge. But it was God who softened hearts, God who paved the way, and God who turned hatred into healing. For you and me, their story is a reminder that no relationship is too far gone. Maybe you carry wounds from family, from friends, from people who betrayed your trust. Maybe you've been Jacob, the one who failed, deceived, or hurt others. Or maybe you've been Esau, the one who was wronged, left with scars. In either case, God's desire is restoration. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Reconciliation doesn't erase the past. But when God steps in, He gives us the courage to bow low like Jacob, the strength to forgive like Esau, and the hope to start again. Jacob's limp reminds us that God sometimes leaves marks on our lives, not as punishment, but as reminders of His grace. Every step Israel took was a testimony: I wrestled with God, and He blessed me. Likewise, Esau's embrace stands as a picture of what happens when mercy defeats anger. And their legacy didn't stop with them. Jacob became the father of Israel, the chosen people through whom the Messiah would come. Jesus Himself, the ultimate reconciler, would one day bring peace not just between brothers, but between God and mankind. The cross became the greatest embrace in history, where God opened His arms to a broken world and said, I forgive you. So when we read Jacob and Esau's story, we're not just reading ancient history. We're seeing God's heart for every fractured relationship, every broken home, every wounded heart. He is the God who restores. The challenge is this: will you let Him? Will you take the step of humility, like Jacob? Will you choose forgiveness, like Esau? Because on the other side of obedience is freedom. On the other side of mercy is peace. Jacob once feared seeing Esau's face. But when forgiveness came, he declared, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. That is the power of reconciliation. That is the beauty of God's restoration.